So this is part of our series of talks that Lena and I have done. We call Biological Mythbusters, where we talk about common misconceptions that people have related to biology. In this case, we wanted to talk about a topic we thought would be kind of fun, which is the concept of natural and nature. So what are some misconceptions, some ideas out there that might not line up with reality related to nature, natural, and artificial? See. So I'm first going to explore, like, not in super a lot of depth, but where this concept of nature and natural comes from. And then I'll spend some time talking about food, like specifically, is organic food better than other forms of food? Are GMOs safe? And then Lena will talk about the myth of natural using cosmetics as an example of looking at natural and artificial compounds. And then lastly, I'll talk about the value of nature and natural. So in our society, people frequently will talk about nature, whether certain things are natural or unnatural, but what exactly does all of this mean? So you might talk about protecting nature, natural ingredients. You might have a debate, like in this video, that's debunking the concept that homosexuality is unnatural, natural areas, human nature. These are kind of pretty commonly used terms and ideas. So the word nature comes from the Latin natura, which originally meant birth, if you look at the first instances of using this word. And it came to represent, kind of like birth, the fundamental or innate qualities of something. So what's fundamental? What's the core part of something? And this use of the word natural is still popular today. So you might talk about, the nature of the universe, understanding human nature, the nature of fascism, on the nature of things. So this is a different concept of natural or nature than if we're talking about plants and animals being nature. This is talking about the core values, the fundamental aspects of something. Natura, meaning birth, also came to mean fundamental inborn qualities associated with humans, which were separate from perceived flexible traits influenced by culture. And this use of nature is used in contrast with culture. And it's exemplified in what tend to be called the nature versus nurture debates. So they have a couple books here about nature and nurture. Are criminals born or made? You can see this spectrum of psychology going from, emphasizing the nature aspects of human behavior to emphasizing the nurture, the cultural upbringing aspects of human behavior. So this is still a topic that people talk about. And this debate has been raging for thousands of years in many different cultures. Like if you look, there's been philosophers and interested people talking about this, in Asian societies and Middle Eastern cultures, African cultures, all around the world, people have talked about this. Just to give you a little example here, this is a quote from the Greek philosopher Plato, kind of emphasizing the nature aspect of human knowledge. He said, "We must always have been born with knowledge and shall always continue to know as long as life lasts." So I think he was kind of thinking about when people are born, they seem to kind of know some stuff. They come with some knowledge, with some ability to understand the world, that they don't have to learn everything. So he was kind of emphasizing that aspect of human knowledge. Here's Aristotle giving a contrasting perspective. Men acquire a particular quality by constantly acting a particular way. You become just by performing just actions, temperate by performing temperate actions, brave by performing brave actions. So emphasizing that someone's nature isn't actually inborn, it's a result of kind of what is their habitual behavior. If you kind of act like you're a certain way, over time you will become that way. So this kind of dynamic of how important is nature versus cultural upbringing and human behavior has been going on for a long time. A third concept of nature, and this is the one we're going to focus on today, revolves around this perceived dichotomy between humans and the rest of the world. So this is kind of exemplified in literature as man versus nature conflicts. Like we're in conflict with nature. We're fighting against nature. Or if you talk about the health benefits of natural spaces, we're not talking about natural spaces being cities. We're talking about natural spaces being spaces where there's not a lot of people that have not been altered that much by humans. Or this concept that humans have domination or control over nature, that we are kind of in this, authority position where we're in control over Mother Earth. So these are still kind of pretty important ideas out there. I think that the origin of this perspective comes from a religious one. So for example, in a Christian worldview, typically that would posit that humans were created in the image of God and have this eternal spiritual existence that separates us from animals. And I'll talk about in a second kind of why that's important to consider animals as separate from ourselves. So I just have a quote there from Genesis. Probably a lot of you know this. Then God said, let us make mankind in our image, in our likeness, so that we may rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, over the livestock and all the wild animals, and over all the creatures that move along the ground. So you can see this idea that humans are not part of these plants and animals. We're in this kind of dominating position. We're in control of all of them. And you can see this article from Catholic.com I found on the right. You're better than any animal. Forget about speciesism. God made you special. So again, this idea that we're this entirely different category of being from everything else that's alive on the planet, which is tied to this idea of us being separate from nature. This belief is actually very widespread, even among people that are not particularly religious. We've kind of talked about this in some previous Biological Mythbusters lectures, but a lot of people don't even categorize humans as animals. They want to think of humans as being a category and animals as being a separate category. And a lot of people seem desperate to validate that belief, to validate wanting to see this fundamental divide separate us from everything else. So like this YouTube video I found, what separates humans from animals? Or what's the difference between human language versus just animal communication? And on the right there, you can see this diagram of an evolutionary ladder, which we've talked about before is an entirely nonsensical way of thinking about evolution, wanting to put organisms on steps on this ladder rather than seeing species as members of a tree. So from this perspective, there are two giant categories in the world: humans and then nature, which is everything else. Like if you search for nature in Google Images like I did here on the left, you can see it's a bunch of pictures of forests and rivers and lakes and mountains, and not pictures of people, not pictures of towns or cities or anything like that. I even looked at like hundreds of them. Like I think it would take a really long time before you would find a picture of a city or a town from searching for nature. Or this idea that we're protecting nature, again showing land where there's not obvious human settlement. So if humans are separate from other life forms, then things we create are also separate. They're not natural things. They're not natural objects. They're something else, artificial. So if a flavor exists outside of us, that's a natural flavor. But if we create it, it's an artificial flavor. If an organism exerts influence over another species to cause them to evolve, that's natural selection, unless we're the ones that are doing it, in which case it's artificial selection. There's natural versus artificial, food ingredients. We have natural versus artificial light. Things that are tied to humans are considered artificial, whereas even if something is produced by another species, that's still considered a natural compound. And I want to be clear that this is kind of a unique belief. This is not something that everyone around the world believes, that there's this divide between humans and everything else, humans and every other species. I had this quote before when I did my lecture on water, but I thought it would fit again to go over it. So this is a quote from the Native American leader Chief Seattle in 1854. So I just want to read it to you. This we know, the earth does not belong to man, man belongs to the earth. All things are connected, like the blood that unites us all. Man did not weave the web of life, he's merely a strand in it. Whatever he does to the web, he does to himself. So this is basically his way of saying, you know, this worldview that you're kind of exposing us to and trying to spread within Native American groups, that humans are this separate thing, we don't believe that. That's not our worldview. We view humans as part of this whole. Just to give you another example, several indigenous groups of Indonesia believe that orangutans are just a type of people. They might call them like the people of the forest. And they view themselves as being kind of family to these orangutans. And they even believe that if certain things happen, a person can transform into an orangutan. So they might see an orangutan and think, oh yeah, that's just my, uncle or something. He just got turned into an orangutan. There's also the Native American group, the Shuar people of the Amazon, who believe that if someone becomes really powerful, they can transform into a jaguar or into an anaconda. So these people wouldn't see humans as this entirely separate thing from every other species. In fact, people can kind of turn into them. They're related to them. So this worldview is kind of unique to us. Of course, according to an evolutionary scientific perspective on life, humans are animals. It would make absolutely no sense to classify humans as anything other than animals, and we're connected to other organisms just as any other organism would be, and not separate at all. So on the left here, this is a really big phylogeny showing all cellular forms of life. This is all bacteria, giving them justice because most of the diversity on our planet is them. This is archaea down here, and then humans are right there. They're in this little point that I've circled there. And you can look on the figure on the right, that's a family tree of primates. There's humans there, nested within the tree in the same way that a baboon would be, or a capuchin monkey would be. We're equally nested within the tree of life. So that's a biological evolutionary perspective. On our planet, humans are integrated into biogeochemical cycles like the water cycle, like the carbon cycle, like any other organism. So if we breathe in oxygen, that affects oxygen levels. If we breathe out CO2, that affects CO2 levels. We're involved in these cycles just like any other organism would be. We're also integrated in food webs, just like every other organism. We feed on other species. When we die, we become food to other species. Sometimes while we're alive, we're food to parasites and so on. So we're as integrated into food webs as any other species would be. So is there an objective justification for this belief, for separating human products and influences, labeling them artificial, from the influences of other animals, which would usually be classified as natural? And some people might point to this. Well, humans have this really big impact on the world. We can modify the world in really drastic ways. So if you look at CO2 levels for the past million years or so, you can see that there's been kind of natural fluctuations, CO2 going up and down on the order of 100,000 years. But just in the last couple hundred years, the level of CO2 has skyrocketed, way above what it would normally get to on the order of millions of years. You also have something like a city where the land has been modified to a very extreme degree over a wide amount of land. So does that justify thinking of our influence in a separate category than the influence of other species? For one thing, I would argue that it doesn't justify this, partially because this is not an inherent human trait. Human groups differ a lot in their population size, their resulting impact, how much they modify the world around themselves. If you look at Brazil, the Carubo people of Brazil, this population, this group, this language is about 500 people in total. And they do not make huge, drastic, fundamental changes to the world around themselves. They kind of live within a rainforest. They don't have this huge impact in terms of biological diversity. You compare that to the population of Tokyo, Japan, that has 14.2 million people, and just look at how much modification has happened in that landscape. So there's huge variations in the amount at which humans change and alter the world around themselves. What's also true is that other species can have tremendous impacts on their environment, not just us. You could talk about ecosystem engineering of corals, creating the most diverse biome within marine ecosystems, constructing this really complex structure where many species can live and grow. You also have the community impacts of keystone species. So sea otters stabilizing their ecosystem and allowing for a much greater diversity of species coexisting than you would have if you remove the sea otters. So species can have really big impacts on the world around themselves by building things, by fundamentally altering the habitat, like you have with elephants clearing forests to make way for grassland, beavers creating large ponds that fundamentally increase the wetness of a region. Another example would be ancestral cyanobacteria, and they evolved this new form of photosynthesis, oxygenic photosynthesis, and this fundamentally altered Earth's atmosphere. It likely caused a massive die-off, a mass extinction event, killing off most of the anaerobic species that had populated our planet for billions of years up until that time. And it allowed for the diversification of oxygen-dependent species like ourselves. So species kind of like you see there on the right would be a fossil version of these cyanobacteria. So this is, in all probability, a much greater impact on atmosphere than anything that humans will cause as a result of climate change. Like, we did not have oxygen at significant levels in our atmosphere at all for billions of years, and then all of a sudden it started to grow until now we have really significant amounts of oxygen, allowing for aerobic life forms, all because of the spread of this group of organisms. If we look at ants, ants can form super colonies, these giant interconnected nests, basically an underground city formed by a single cooperative population of ants. And these super colonies can be huge. The largest known super colony stretches across Western Europe, 3,700 miles in length. You can see all of the red dots here are all ants that are members of this super colony. They all cooperate with each other. They all work together. They're all basically one giant population. There's also another super colony in California that you can see mapped here by these red points. This is all one giant population of Argentine ants. Leafcutter ants also practice agriculture. So they grow fungi underground. They go and they cut leaves, but they don't eat the leaves. They feed the leaves to their fungus, which you can see in the middle picture there. And then they use that fungus as a food supply. So they've been domesticating this fungus and growing it for about 50 million years. And the fungus has evolutionary changed drastically as a result of ant selection. So is this different than the type of artificial selection that humans have when we practice agriculture? So is there an objective justification for classifying humans or human influence or creations as not natural? I would argue no. I don't think it's meaningful to do that. Organisms vary in how much impact they have on the world around themselves. Like elephants have this huge impact on the grasslands of Africa. They push down trees, they make way for grasslands, they help to spread seeds through their dung. If you compare the impact of an elephant to something like this little antelope guy on the right, they're grazers, but if you remove them, that won't fundamentally change the habitat to the same degree as removing African elephants. So species vary in how much of an impact they have on the world around themselves, in the same way that human groups do. So you have small-scale societies like hunter-gatherers or small-scale agricultural societies that have low impact on the habitat, on biodiversity, and you can compare that to large-scale agricultural societies. On the right there, that's an airplane view of the middle of the United States, just showing these enormous fields of agriculture that have drastically transformed the landscape there. So humans differ a lot, just like you have species that differ in how much of an impact they have. I don't think it's justification for suddenly saying that any human group, what they produce, is unnatural compared to any other species. So I've talked a lot about kind of the nature of this belief in nature and natural, but let's look at some specific example related to food. One area where a lot of people care about what's natural is with food. So I'm going to consider two extremes of food production, organic farming versus GMOs, to see what can science tell us about the safety and benefit of each of these forms of agriculture. I think a lot of people in our society have these positive associations with organic foods. They're imagining that their crops grown in maybe a mixed crop field with no fertilizers or pesticides or GMO plants. But is this true? Like, is that what organic means? According to the US Department of Agriculture, what qualifies a food as organic is that they're made without synthetic fertilizers, artificial pesticides, or GMOs. So they're not GMOs, but they can be made with fertilizers. They can be made with pesticides, as long as they are naturally occurring chemicals. And even this, there are exceptions. So if you pull up the USDA website, they have a whole section. It's called Synthetic Substances Allowed for Use in Organic Crop Production, which is a bunch of human-made, non-naturally occurring chemicals that are allowed to be used in organic farming. So even this distinction, there are exceptions to it. So organic foods can be grown using fertilizers as long as they're naturally occurring chemicals. Like you could use manure as a fertilizer. You could grind up plants to make a fertilizer. You can also grind up animals. I have a couple fun examples here of those. We have blood meal used as a fertilizer. Also crab meal used by grinding up some crabs. Use that to grow some crops. You can also make them out of minerals. So on the right there, those are a couple of minerals that people will mine. And they'll kind of grind it up and use that to make fertilizer. They are naturally occurring minerals, so they're allowed to be used as fertilizer in organic farms. Organic food can also be sprayed with pesticides as long as they're naturally occurring chemicals, like minerals that are just toxic by nature, poisons originating from plants, animals, or bacteria. So they can be sprayed with basically as much pesticide as you want, as long as it's something that's naturally occurring, like copper sulfate, naturally occurring boric acid, lime sulfur. Those are all naturally occurring poisons that can be sprayed on organic crops. But the big question is, are these natural substances actually safer than artificial alternatives? So one important point to consider, the fact that a chemical is naturally occurring doesn't make it safe. Like we know that in soil, lead and mercury are naturally occurring elements. That doesn't make them safe. They're not safe. They're highly toxic. Lead and mercury are also naturally occurring in ocean water, as is arsenic. But those are all poisonous and toxic to people. A lot of plants produce toxins. Like apples, they produce cyanide. Their seeds are full of cyanide. So if someone was kind of dumb and they were juicing apples and they threw the cores in, if you did that enough, you could make yourself sick. If you kept doing it, you could die from cyanide poisoning. So you can't, grind up those little seeds. They're full of cyanide. Animal toxins can be lethal to humans, like rattlesnake venom or, jellyfish poison. And harmful substances like uranium are naturally occurring. Like if you look at the soils of the United States, this is showing the amount of uranium in different soils and surface rocks, and there are regions where there's a lot of it. So if you just dug up the soil there or found some rocks on the surface, they would have low levels of uranium. But that doesn't mean uranium is safe. Both organic and artificial fertilizers have the function of promoting plant growth. They have nitrogen. They provide other nutrients like phosphorus. So because of this, both of them can lead to harmful algal blooms and cause other environmental damage. So the fact that it's an organic fertilizer doesn't matter as far as eutrophication and the formation of harmful algal blooms. So this is a little sample of organic pesticides and their harmful effects. So copper sulfate, which I showed before, causes skin, eye damage, gastrointestinal problems, organ damage in high amounts. To the ecosystem, it can kill plants, fish, birds, various forms of algae. Boric acid causes kidney damage, birth defects, and reduced fertility in humans. Pyrethrin causes respiratory damage and death, kills bees, fish, aquatic invertebrates. Rotenone causes kidney, liver, gastrointestinal damage, nervous system damage, and kills fish and aquatic invertebrates. Lime sulfur damages skin and can cause blindness, including permanent blindness for workers exposed to it especially, and is known to kill fish and insects. Bacillus toxin, which comes from bacteria, is known to cause allergic reactions in some people and can kill bees and aquatic invertebrates when entering into the wild. So these are all organic pesticides. Tetracycline is an antibiotic, but it's also used as a pesticide, known to kill algae, damaging fish development, promoting antibiotic-resistant bacteria in the environment. So there's a lot of negative consequences to these organic pesticides, despite the fact that they are organic. But I want you to keep in mind that I'm not saying artificial pesticides are better. They're also very harmful. Here's a couple of the most commonly used artificial pesticides in the world. Roundup, which is called glyphosate. Health effects in humans, it's known to cause liver and kidney damage. It likely causes cancer in people. It's known to disrupt normal nervous system development. And when entering into the environment, it damages soil, aquatic organisms, including especially fish and amphibians. Another common artificial pesticide, atrazine, in humans damages liver, kidney, heart, likely causes cancer and birth defects, affects reproductive development. And in the environment, it damages fish and amphibians, including fundamentally altering the reproductive development of amphibians. So there's a lot of nasty consequences to these artificial pesticides as well. So what does all of this mean? Like if organic pesticides and fertilizers can be bad, and conventional pesticides and fertilizers can be bad, how do they actually compare with each other? Although organic foods can be contaminated with harmful pesticides, they are usually sprayed with less pesticides than conventional crops and less toxic pesticides. So this graph on the left, this is showing for tomatoes in a county in California, and it's showing the amount of pesticides sprayed for conventionally grown crops versus organic crops. So there's just more pesticides sprayed in this county on the conventional crops. If we look across California, the amount of pesticides sprayed that are in these different categories, so basically non-toxic pesticides, there's a lot more of those for organic crops, but for slightly toxic, moderately toxic, and highly toxic pesticides, more of those are sprayed on conventional crops than on organic crops. So there tends to be more dangerous pesticides sprayed for conventional crops. And because of this, people who eat organic food do tend to have less detected pesticides in their bloodstream. This is from a study that had people switch to consuming organic food, and then it measured the level of different types of pesticides in their bloodstream before and after. And you can see for all of these different categories of pesticides, they had a reduction in pesticide level in their body after switching to an organic diet. So eating organic foods and consuming less pesticides is associated with many health effects, including lower rates of infertility, lower birth defects, allergies, certain cancers, and many other health conditions. And there's some sources if you want to look more into it. So there are actual health benefits to eating organic foods, primarily from the less consumption of pesticides, rather than actual nutritional differences between the foods, which is usually negligent. As an example here, this was a study looking at preeclampsia, so like high blood pressure condition for pregnant women, showing that if they ate mostly organic food, they had much lower risks of preeclampsia compared to if they did not consume organic foods. And on the right here, this is just showing pesticide residue for some fruits and vegetables from organic versus conventional farming. You can see there are pesticide residues on organic crops, so it's still good to rinse them off, but they tend to be much less compared to conventionally grown crops. So there is a difference. Yes?
Do you think the one with the preeclampsia could be like the correlation with it? If you're eating healthier foods, that you might tend to just be healthier in general and therefore have lower risk?
Yeah, I don't remember the exact methodology, if this was like randomly assigned or not. But I think in general, there's really good evidence for, a bunch of different health effects. And I don't think it was just this study. So I think it's pretty solid that organic foods would decrease the risk of that. So if you compare them in terms of environmental impact, organic farming uses more land than conventional farming. Okay, so that's a big impact, kind of in favor of conventional farming, but it uses less energy. It does tend to cause more eutrophication compared to conventional farming, and they have similar emissions as other farms. So all in all, it's sort of a mixed bag in terms of their global impact of organic versus conventional farming. One exception to this, though, is how they impact the surrounding ecosystem. So because conventional farming tends to release a lot more pesticides and more dangerous pesticides, they tend to have a more negative impact on the surrounding wildlife. So this was a review article that looked at whether organic farming tended to benefit various types of species groups compared to conventional farming. And in most cases, it did. So there was less negative impact on surrounding wildlife, birds, mammals, plants, invertebrates for organic farming compared to conventional farming. So organic farming does have some definite benefits compared to conventional farming, but this is not because natural substances are safe and artificial substances are not. In fact, one of the most harmful pesticides in the world, rotenone, has been discontinued for use in the United States, even though it is a natural chemical taken from the roots of plants. And it was previously used as an organic pesticide. But, the US government found that it was too dangerous to be used as a pesticide, so it was phased out, even though it was an organic pesticide. So each chemical has to be examined for its effects on humans and other species, regardless of its origin, regardless of if it was considered a naturally occurring chemical or not. So let's switch topics and now look at GMOs. A lot of Americans are growing more concerned over the presence of GMOs in their food, and this number is increasing over time. So on this graph on the left, you can see that red line is actually people that are rarely or never thinking about GMOs. And the one that's all or most of the time thinking about GMOs is the blue one. So there's been almost a double in the amount of people in the US who are concerned with GMOs when they're purchasing food. So what exactly are GMOs, what people are concerned about, and should we be worried about them? So GMOs are genetically modified organisms. They're plants or animals that have had their DNA manipulated, spliced in a laboratory to improve yield, to add bacterial resistance, drought tolerance, etc. So typically, you would have a gene from a different organism that was moved into your GMO organism, like transplanted into their genome. And this kind of started in the 1980s. Agricultural scientists have produced several different GMO species, including tomatoes, salmon, corn, cotton, rice, cows, and pigs. The first GMO that was approved for use in the United States was the Flavor Saver tomato in 1994 that would last longer and not go bad as quickly as typical tomatoes. This middle one is called EnviroPig, and this was a GMO pig that was actually invented at my alma mater, the University of Guelph in Canada, like kind of right before I went there. So that was a project from their agricultural department. And then golden rice, kind of a newer GMO that has a vitamin A precursor kind of built into the rice itself to increase people's access to vitamin A. This was created in 2004. Yes.
About that big
I think
lean or something, or
I think it has something to do with like its tolerance for weather conditions or how much water it was, something like that. But I think the project didn't last that long, but it's been a while since I read into it. But it was something like that it could tolerate certain environmental conditions, I think. So the United States is actually the biggest producer of GMO crops in the world. So that's how much production comes from the United States, almost half. Brazil and Argentina are also really big producers. Canada's pretty big. And over 90% of the soybeans, cotton, and corn in the United States are GMOs. You can see the rise for these crops of what proportion of them are GMOs going from the late 90s until 2012, this steady rise as GMO crops replace their non-GMO, other versions of these crops in fields. Now, in theory, we can never say that GMOs as a group are safe. And that is because each GMO is its own unique Frankenstein organism. They're not actually closely related to each other. Each one is formed from its own genes inserted into its own organism. So each one has the potential to be individually harmful or harmless. So each creation has to be evaluated individually. GMOs in the United States go through a systematic review process by the FDA before they're approved for human consumption. So I think that's the reason why a lot of sciencey minded people would say that they're safe, because they have to go through this rigorous review process, although I don't know how rigorous that will be in the current environment. So these are some examples of GMO crops in the United States. You can see like cotton, soybeans, beets, canola, papaya, and so on. And this is showing the process on the left of typically how you would create a GMO crop. Is you have this bacterium that carries this little circular ring of DNA called a plasmid, and people would insert the gene that they want into that plasmid. And then the bacterium would infect some plant cells. And as it infects them, it injects its DNA, its plasmid, into the genome of the host plant. So then the plant gets fundamentally changed due to the insertion of this genetic material. So despite the mainstream claims by agricultural companies that GMOs as a class are proven safe, this is not actually the consensus of scientists who study this topic, who are kind of experts on agricultural chemicals and their toxicity. Like, for example, there's this article, No Scientific Consensus on GMO Safety. And they also released a statement signed by several hundred agricultural scientists saying to the effect that we don't agree that as a group, these are considered safe. And there's some evidence that certain GMOs are dangerous. So if you want to look at those articles, those are individual ones. The statement of the WHO, World Health Organization, on GMOs is basically what I said before. Different GM organisms include different genes inserted in different ways. This means that individual GM foods and their safety should be assessed on a case-by-case basis, and it is not possible to make general statements on the safety of all GM foods. So you can never say that this is, as a group, is safe, and we should no longer, investigate every new GMO that's approved. According to the scientists who wrote this study, unbiased long-term studies are desperately needed to figure out whether GMOs that have been already approved are actually safe or not. In most cases, there's insufficient data to conclude one way or the other. So more and more Americans are concerned about GMOs, and a lot of groups, including the American Medical Association, have pushed for mandatory labeling of GMOs in food products. So for example, if someone had very severe food allergies, they could be allergic to GMO compounds where they wouldn't be allergic to other forms of that food. So it would be helpful for people, for patients, to be able to tell exactly what they're consuming. But although we are the biggest producer of GMOs in the world, we are one of the few countries in the world where GMO labeling is not required. So the countries that are in white do not have GMO products labeled. Everything that's kind of orange, it is required to label all GMO products as such. So you can see basically Europe and most of Asia and Australia, even Brazil, which is like the second biggest producer of GMOs, all require labeling. But the United States does not. Even Russia and China require labeling. Canada does not, Mexico does not. Probably a lot of that has to do with trade between our countries because we're all pretty big producers of GMOs. But we don't require labeling. Even in California, we had the chance. Sorry, is there a question? Yeah, go ahead.
Like how we I'm assuming that's federal law, because different states have different laws.
Yes. I am not, there might be some states that require it. I was going to just talk about California, because California had the chance to label it within California of GMO products. This was back in 2012. It was called Proposition 37. So there were some groups, like some organic food groups and so forth, some health groups that wanted to label GMOs, but they were drastically outspent, like 5 to 1, by agro-tech companies like Monsanto, Kraft, Pepsi, Bayer. So they outspent them, and they made some pretty misleading ads. I've got one of the ads here I want to show you. Hope this works. Let's try.
Farmers already face a devastating drought, causing higher food prices. Now, California farmers are threatened by Prop 37, a complex bureaucratic food labeling proposition that would increase costs to food producers and consumers by billions of dollars.
It's going to put the California farmer at a disadvantage with the other 49 states. The people that are least able to pay are going to be forced to pay more. Please join California farmers in voting no on Prop 37.
So there wasn't actually anything about increasing prices of food. It was just that food had to be labeled as GMOs or not. I think the agricultural companies just thought if people knew about GMO foods, they might not buy them. But to me, that doesn't seem like a good rationale for not labeling them in the first place. But they won. This proposition was defeated, so we did not have mandatory GMO labeling in California. So agricultural and food companies appear confident that GMOs are safe. However, they also appear to think pretty poorly of the public's intelligence based on how much they've pushed back against labeling GMO products. A lot of the food technology progress and events that have happened have been carried out without public understanding. Like, I think a lot of people don't know this. So did you know that when you consume corn or potatoes in the US, if they're not organic, you are consuming bacterial toxins that cannot be rinsed off. That Bt toxin that is an organic pesticide, people implanted it into the tissue of these crop plants. So it's not a pesticide that's sprayed on them, it's a pesticide that is grown in the tissue of the corn. It cannot be rinsed off. Yes?
For this one, it's been there for a while, they've been doing it for a while. And this is, this particular toxin is only toxic to insects.
Well,
only insect.
That's why they did it. Although there have been some evidence that some people tend to have strong allergic reactions to it, even though most don't.
Anytime you insert anything, you
Right.
put anything in a, you know, that could be a protein like peanut protein
Yeah.
as well, could cause allergy. So
Right.
individuals could be allergic to these.
That's right. Which
So
is
this-
why the AMA wants these to be labeled. So
Yeah.
if someone is allergic, yeah,
I'm all for labeling. I give
Right.
this lecture in my microbiology class up there, we gave it about a week ago. And the amount of money that's given to the government, there's a really nice cartoon that shows that. Is amazing how much the Monsanto, all these guys do for what they do.
yeah,
Because it, you know, they just don't want labeling. I mean, we're asking them not to use it, it's just
Right.
label it, but people have to be educated. to
Right.
Understand what the label means, because better people read any label. That's
Right.
what I found in my,
yeah.
you know, looking at my food.
But I think whether or not it's actually dangerous, and I think people have found pretty conclusively that as far as poisons go, this is a pretty harmless poison. But it's still that I think most people aren't even aware of this fact that, oh, if you're eating corn and you rinse it off, well, you're still consuming toxins, originally bacterial toxins in the flesh of the corn. People wouldn't be happy about that, which means that the agriculture companies need to convince people that that's okay. But just kind of not telling them, to me, is immoral.
Plus, the fact that we irradiate a lot of foods that we don't tell people that are irradiated.
Right.
All the spices that come from overseas have to be irradiated. So, for example, with cinnamon or anything that's a spice that comes from a tree or something, you know, insects can lay their eggs.
Mhm.
You could transfer them all the way down here, like what happened to the Mets fly back in the
Yeah.
70s.
Yeah.
California, for example, almost wiped out our agriculture here. There are certain products that are labeled, like for example, those chicken free, those doggy free, chicken free,
Yeah.
whatever you could call it. They have the Radura sign that says it has been irradiated.
Mhm.
But normally folks don't understand what the sign means,
Right.
and we're still, still buying spices and all other stuff.
Yeah.
And it's just that irradiated food has no residual radiation in it. It's just, you like getting an X-ray.
Right.
That's all it is.
Yeah.
It's just that I think it also should be labeled.
Right. So I think the philosophy of the agricultural companies is let's just not have the public know about anything that we're doing. But I think that's not a good way to proceed forward. It's better for people to understand so they can make educated decisions about it. In terms of the impact to the environment, there is considerable evidence that GMOs can cause considerable damage by novel DNA spreading to nearby populations. So you could have GMO crops that kind of interbreed and send out their DNA. So now all of the wild populations are now kind of invaded by these GMO genes. It also can increase pest resistance because a lot of times they will make plants GMO plants immune to certain poisons, and then they'll just dump the poisons in even higher amounts, which can increase pest resistance, as well as other factors like you can see here on the left. So on the right, that shows that as they developed crops, GMO crops that were resistant to glyphosate, then suddenly they sprayed them with glyphosate in much larger amounts, because now the crops themselves won't be poisoned by this pesticide, so they can spray even more onto the crops, which has a negative impact on the surrounding wildlife. So there's a lot of ways that GMOs can end up having a greater environmental effect compared to non-GMO crops. So at this point, I would say responsible scientists should say that although there's not overwhelming evidence that GMOs produced so far are very dangerous, it is in fact wrong to say that GMOs as a class in general are safe. So this group, which is funded by Bill Gates, Alliance for Science, which kind of puts out pro-GMO articles because he wants to increase GMO production going into Africa. It is not true that scientists have agreed that GMOs are safe and there's no debate on the subject anymore. Do you have a question, Zaya?
Yeah, I have a quick question. First of all, thank you for this talk. Is there any evidence sometimes these GMO genes can jump from one species to another, like an unintended jump?
I think that has happened.
Can you repeat the question?
He was asking if there's evidence that GMO traits have ever crossed between species. I don't know. I don't remember offhand the specifics, but I do think that has occurred. Yes.
And that can be problematic too.
That's right. And even just having GMOs spreading to, other corn. Now it's like, well, now is your organic corn actually organic if it's been invaded by, GMO genes? That's a good point. A lot of large-scale studies are needed, and I think if agricultural companies are not actually doing anything wrong with GMOs, they should not be afraid of transparency, because the public has just turned more and more against GMOs. So if they are correct that GMOs are safe and people should trust them, then they should convince people of that rather than to just try to make it not transparent whether foods are actually GMOs or not. Okay, so we're going to take a little intermission, like a 10-minute break, and then we'll return to our discussion. Lena will talk to you next about natural versus artificial in the realm of cosmetics. So thank you all. We'll just take a little break when we get set up for the next part.
do a skincare one too. Okay, low toxic, non-toxic makeup for the Sephora sale from someone who prioritizes low toxic and non-toxic products, but will never use them just because they say low toxic and non-toxic. Like, we want them to be as good or better than the toxic products.
Clean beauty swaps. Stopping on sale is the best time to do it so that you can save some money or just stock up on your favorites. So here are some recommendations from someone that reads the
Is that new PowerPoint showing up to people? Can you see that?
Yeah, I can see it, Josh.
Yeah, we
Okay,
can
great.
see it.
Thank you. Thank you very much. You want to ask again?
Can you hear me okay if I'm standing here?
Is that too far?
No, she's fine.
You can hear her
Okay.
okay? All right.
I can.
Okay, great.
Okay. Okay. So I think my topic, so I'm Lena Coleman, and I'm a biology professor, just like Joshua, here at ABC. And so my topic is kind of following from his, and this idea that if the myth of natural means that, you know, there's no such thing between, if we're trying to divide things by good or bad, but that's not the same distinction as natural versus artificial. All right, so what's so bad about that? It's kind of prevalent in our society that we have this idea that natural is good and artificial is bad. Well, can that lead to situations where it misguides us? Right? So if we have this assumption that's incorrect, and then as a society, we tend to build on that, overall, where are we headed? Can it misguide us? Can it lead to the spread of misinformation generally in our society, or even disinformation? So I think in general, so I'm going to use the example of cosmetics and kind of the idea that as a society, especially with the internet and kind of information traveling very quickly now, that idea that natural is safe, unnatural is bad, drastically oversimplifies a complex topic. So just as Josh has been talking about, you know, there's not necessarily anything that says because this comes from nature, this is safe, versus because this is artificial, this is bad. It needs to be looked at on a case-by-case basis. All right, so as my example here, I have Clostridium botulinum, which produces the botulinum toxin, which is one of the most potent toxins, right? But you could have a list of things like arsenic and lead and all of these other things that are naturally occurring. And yes, they're highly toxic. Now, it's also the case that there are highly toxic things that are artificial. So that means that that's not a good place to make this distinction. It oversimplifies a complex topic. And maybe the problem with this is, like when I think about this as an evolutionary biologist and thinking about different forms of selection, is that in environments like the internet, where you have, you know, we call this now the age of information, but really it's like, well, what things tend to spread the fastest, right? Things that are flashy, things that are the most attention-grabbing topics, but not necessarily things that are tied to if they're the reality of the situation or not, right? And why is that the case? Well, typically the real story can be very detailed, it can be complicated, it can be nuanced, and not very flashy at all. And those are things that tend to do horribly in terms of being like widely spread in places like the internet. And so to add all of that flash, let's say you add in a financial gain, maybe from marketers or companies. And instead of this being information superhighway, it's a disinformation superhighway, right? Okay. So I'm going to use this example of cosmetic, all right? It's kind of like this practical societal application of why this idea of natural good, unnatural bad kind of leads to this buildup of misinformation. So generally in cosmetics, a lot of companies have kind of started with this idea of making something called clean beauty, right? So here we have from Target, from Sephora, and from lots of places where they're putting on their labels little seals and kind of talking about being free of certain ingredients, and that makes them clean versus the products that do have those ingredients, I guess, are dirty, right? Okay. So I'm going to play some examples from videos here of influencers from TikTok talking about these products that are clean versus dirty, and you know where you can buy them versus not buy them. Right. You want to?
Okay.
First, I can do a skincare one too. Okay, low toxic, non-toxic makeup for the Sephora sale from someone who prioritizes low toxic and non-toxic products, but will never use them just because they say low toxic and non-toxic. Like, we want them to be as good or better than the toxic products. I can do a skincare one too.
What?
Okay, low toxic, non-toxic.
Stopping on sale is the best time to do it so that you can save some money or just stock up on your favorites. So here are some recommendations from someone that reads the ingredient labels and only shops products that are free of endocrine disruptors and carcinogens. If you're looking for a clean perfume, Sephora has 3 brands that are transparent about their fragrance. All of them smell so good that you wouldn't even be able to tell that they're clean, except they're way better for your health. For makeup,
Tips. Here are 3 affordable non-toxic shampoos you can find at Target. 2 aisles full of hair care can be very overwhelming, but I narrowed it down to 3 brands for you. The first brand is Odell. They don't use any harsh chemicals and the fragrance is 100% natural. Next is Shea Moisture. It's made with raw shea butter, which creates a gentle cleanser that improves hair health and restores its shine. And the last one is Faith in Nature. I couldn't find this one at my Target, but I've seen it online. They use natural, sustainable, and locally sourced ingredients. Save this post so you have it next time you're at Target and follow up for more clean beauty.
what clean swaps you want to see next. Come with me to Target while I help you find cleaner and non-toxic swaps to your everyday makeup products. Most conventional makeup is made with ingredients that are linked to hormone disruption or cancer, so I recommend you trying the CoverGirl Simply Ageless Foundation made with 100% clean ingredients. I also recommend swapping your concealer to the Well People one. This powder specifically is made with parabens, which mimic estrogen in the body and disrupt your hormones, so definitely check out Honest Beauty. They have an amazing loose powder. Unfortunately, this Maybelline mascara has ingredients that can be contaminated with known carcinogens, so again, Well People is an amazing clean brand to check out. These glosses by e.l.f. have synthetic dyes and fragrance, so check out the Clear Diamond Gloss by Physicians Formula instead. Thanks for watching and let me know.
Okay, so there was a lot said in there about things as being toxic versus non-toxic, potential endocrine disruptors, carcinogens.
Clean beauty swaps. Shopping on sale is the best time to do it.
Okay, there we go.
Okay, so let's start with some distinctions they made. All right, so they said things like, these products are toxic, these are non-toxic, clean versus dirty, natural versus artificial, and healthy versus unhealthy. And like I said, this kind of oversimplifies a complex topic. But even with that, so I think Joshua has kind of presented this message that it's definitely true that we can kind of say, there's both good and bad examples of natural and artificial chemicals, right? But it's actually not enough to just say that, because it's more complicated than that. And so I'm going to bring up this idea of hazard versus risk, which is something they consider in toxicology, where these are actually the scientists kind of considering what is safe in products versus not. So hazard is something that's a potential source of harm. The risk comes from the likelihood or severity of that harm occurring, right? So you can kind of think that lions are hazardous, right? But your risk of harm from a lion is very different if you're observing them at a zoo versus if you were just kind of out in nature and there was no protection around you and you were right there, 3 feet from one, right? So that can make a big difference. So how do you determine the risk of something? So in general, here's a couple of things to consider that are beyond just saying this product is good or this chemical is good, this ingredient is bad. So number one is the delivery method. How do you take it in? So I think you could probably agree that eating hot sauce is fine, but inhaling it is not. All right, maybe concentration. So in general, all right, we talked about uranium and this idea that, something is unsafe, but it's also a question of at what concentration is it safe versus unsafe. So everyone has, on average, about 90 micrograms of uranium in their body. And the reason why this isn't necessarily an issue is because it's at such a low concentration. So concentrations of substances matter. And, we kind of tend to think about things as categories, safe versus unsafe. But really, the safety is something that's kind of on a spectrum, right? A gradation of how much are you exposed to, what is the concentration of what you're exposed to. But in a way, it's kind of like the different ends of the spectrum can make a huge difference, right? So if we take one 200 milligram tablet of Advil, that might cure your headache, right? But if you take 20 of those, it's going to do something else, right? Like maybe it's going to cause liver damage. And so even though these are at ends of the spectrum, they cause kind of categorically different effects, right? And so just to say something is known to cause a particular effect, it matters at what concentration they're talking about. The other thing is, how often are you exposed to a substance? So are you using it on a daily basis? Are you using it once a month? Is it something you use very infrequently? All of that matters into calculating your risk. Okay, so then you might even think about, well, why even take the risk at all? Why do we have to have these toxic chemicals in our products? All right, so toxicologists are the people, the scientists that determine kind of this hazard versus risk ratio. They're trying to balance the two, kind of like the goal of doing what that product is intended to do or that ingredient is intended to do versus safety. And there is a real danger from microorganisms contaminating products. So this is showing mold in beauty cream. You can have bacterial contamination in things like shampoos. If you want things to be shelf stable, you have to have preservatives in them to protect them from growth of mold, bacteria, yeast, things like that. So that's why they have to be there in general, but we need to balance that in such a way that it's not necessarily hazardous at the concentration that they're putting it. It needs to be dangerous for the bacteria, but not for the human. So then that brings us to things like this. So this is an app that is called Yuka, and it's one of many that kind of shows, like you can look up a product when you're in a store, and it's going to give you a list of chemicals associated with it, and it's going to tell you if it's bad or good, right? So we have petroleum, hazardous, a wax, moderate risk, phenoxyethanol, moderate risk, isopropyl palmitate, no risk. So it's kind of like we're saying, this is good, this is bad, this is good, this is bad. But again, it's not about necessarily, it's not as simple as this, right? Like you have to consider, what is the concentration it's being used at? How are you being exposed to it? Are you putting it on your skin versus are you ingesting it? So it's not enough to just look at something like this, and this gives us kind of an incorrect or misleading kind of idea of what these things are. And again, that kind of opens us up to being vulnerable to, marketing that's not true, kind of having general beliefs about how things work that are not true. Like, I think we would want to think that we're concerned about the things that are dangerous, and we're not as concerned about the things that are proven safe. And so if we go forward kind of with these oversimplifications, it just kind of clouds all of that. So let's look at some of the things that we talked about in the video as, potential things that are harmful. So I have a list here of different preservatives that you find in different cosmetic products, shampoos, soaps, things like that. And sodium benzoate is actually a preservative found in food, all right? So what do we know? What's the data on the safety of sodium benzoate? Well, at low doses, it's considered safe for human consumption. There is an issue with it transforming into a product called benzene, which is highly toxic. It's a carcinogen. And when it's combined with acidic chemicals, for example, with vitamin C, which you can get in things like soft drinks, then there's the potential for it forming that chemical benzene. At high doses, again, it can be highly harmful. Again, this is at a high concentration. All right, and then there's some evidence showing that there's positive effects. All right, so maybe it could be that, at low doses, it could have some medicinal effects. This is phenoxyethanol, another very common preservative. And again, for the dosage, it's considered safe, all right? But at higher doses, yes, it can cause lots of severe damage. But the key is that we're using it in a low concentration. And then parabens, so parabens are a very common chemical that is put on bottles usually because it's paraben-free, right? So there's different types of parabens, number one, and they all have different effects, even though oftentimes it's kind of lumped together. like overall their effect, even though overall they're slightly different, right? But in general, I think maybe this particular group of chemicals is kind of like a victim of its success, that because it's kind of done such a good job, it's kind of gone largely unnoticed and underappreciated. But then on the other hand, it's a very old preservative. It's been around for a long time, and because of that, there's been lots of studies done with it. And so I think there's more of a potential risk for kind of people to misinterpret the information about it.
They use it in shampoo or something? What do they use?
Yeah.
I remember reading it in
Yeah.
in shampoo bottle a long time ago.
But yeah, in general, like cosmetics or things that you would buy that are shelf stable. So again, we kind of see the same thing where it's at a low concentration, it's relatively safe, and at high concentrations, that's when it starts to be, you know, it's like if you're feeding rats or in a lab situation where you're giving them very, very high doses of something, that it's dangerous. But that's not actually being tested in a human and not at the concentration that a person is actually exposed to. And then methyl isolinazone, and then a relative of that, isothiolinazone, another preservative. This one also known for being safe, but it does have some evidence that it can cause allergic reactions to be higher so than other preservatives. So, with all of that in mind, so I have some of the products that they talked about in the video, all right, as being clean products, and let's look at what their ingredients are. So this is one of the shampoos, and so generally, it's not very different from what you would have in a typical shampoo, and even though it doesn't have paraben, it does have sodium benzoate, which
It's much worse.
yeah, is much worse. I mean, at low doses,
Yeah.
it's known to be fine, but in other ways, yeah, you could make a pretty good argument that it's worse than using something like paraben because, again, they can't now put a preservative in here. They have to put something. So even though they say it's free of one thing, it doesn't mean there's no preservative in it. It just means it's not using that particular one.
What it said fragrant.
Mm-hmm.
What is that?
I think in general, when I was kind of reading about that, companies can kind of be very secretive about what a particular fragrance is. So they don't want to actually put what they've added into it because they don't want someone to copy that particular fragrance. But there's kind of, I think, mixed information about it in general. I think it kind of goes through similar testing that other products have to because all of these things are still regulated by the Food and Drug and Cosmetics. But in general, I think it's probably something that overall is at least not any less safe than anything else. Okay, so this one here, right, also has sodium benzoate in it. And also notice it has a lot of oils in it. So, I mean, they kind of are living up to what they're saying that, you know, it is a natural product, right? It has a lot of essential oils, rosemary extract. It's paraben free, but it does have sodium benzoate, right? And then
Could you back up just a second? Why? This is shampoo, right?
Yes.
Why? Well, would they put caffeine and then Saccharomyces, that's going to be yeast.
Mm-hmm.
Xylenium, but it could be a mold yeast or something. Black tea ferment, that's when they fermented black tea, put the extract in there.
Mm-hmm.
Lactobacillus, why would they put the probiotic in your hair? I'm trying to see what.
Yeah, I mean, I think for some of those, I'm not exactly sure what the benefits would be. It's possible they have some, but it's also true about delivery method, right? Because typically our skin is a very good barrier at keeping things out. And so it might not be that, you know, putting black tea ferment on your hair would be as beneficial as consuming it.
I'm just kind of looking at what useless
stuff
there is out there just to impress the simple-minded, simpletons out there that are going to buy something with more than 3 ingredients. I mean, that's kind of like, good God, and then put certified organic ingredients and so forth, and, vegan lactic acid. Geez, how stupid people could be.
Yeah, I mean, it's so like the point kind of is, well, if the most, like, or not maybe the most, but if one thing that's like a really high concern is like what preservative is in there. It's so that there's no evidence that sodium benzoate is better than paraben, yet they're advertising that it's paraben free, like it's somehow safe.
The paraben is used as a,
Preservative.
to keep it from growing microorganisms.
Yeah. That's what all of those different, the ones that I showed you were very common ones that are typical preservatives. All right, and this one, one of the videos also mentioned this. So it has at the bottom here, you can see sodium benzoate. It also has linalool, and these different ones down here are essential oils. And so I kind of want to take a minute to talk about that. So in general, essential oils, they don't really have the same types of regulations that you have over other cosmetics. And part of that, is that because if something is natural, then it's not given as much scrutiny as things that are artificial, because we're assuming if they're man-made, they're more dangerous than things that are natural. But in general, most essential oils are plant-derived materials that can have like a relatively high chance of causing someone something like contact dermatitis, or just in general be allergy causing. And so it's not necessarily the case that just because you put these natural products into something that you've somehow made it safer. Okay. So that's my part of it. So in general, kind of this idea that, taking this idea and then seeing this effect of how you can have this societal idea, it gets hooked on by marketing companies, and it kind of gets used to spread misinformation about the safety of a product. So they're marketing things as safe, when really they're probably no different from the things that they're calling dirty or toxic. And then the other part of it is it kind of distracts us from what we should be really looking at. Like, there are dangerous chemicals out there in the environment. There are things we should be concerned about. But you have these companies kind of misleading consumers into thinking that there's all of these dangers kind of when you go down the aisle that are not there, kind of wasting our time and energy on things that are maybe not so much of an issue as other things that maybe are not as well known and people don't know about and kind of like plugged in under the rug. But because it's not necessarily anything that has to do with financial gain, they're not talked about. Okay, that's my part.
Okay. Go back to second.
Are you having trouble getting the double?
No, I'll get it. I just was switching it back to there we go. Just want to make sure I'm screen sharing it. No, I think it's working okay. I'm just switching it back over to here. Okay. Is that showing okay now? Do I have that
Yes.
right? Okay, great. Thank you. Okay. It's up to you.
Yeah, it's okay.
Okay. So the last thing I want to talk about is the value of nature. So like I mentioned kind of early on in the talk, I would say that the distinction between man and nature is fundamentally illogical and without objective basis. But that doesn't mean that nature or natural lands is without value. Like, nature can be a stand-in, like a shorthand way of saying lands that have not been heavily modified by humans. So for example, by large-scale agriculture, roads, and construction for cities or other uses. Like, if that's what nature means, then there is benefit to land like that. Like, if we looked at This is like a reconstruction of what Manhattan, New York used to look like before Europeans arrived versus how it looks today. This wasn't no humans, right? You know, those fires there, that was people there. People were living in that area for thousands of years. And yet this is much less modified, a much lower impact on biodiversity and habitat compared to the usage on the right. So large-scale modification of natural lands like forests, grasslands, wetlands, and water bodies have caused catastrophic impacts on other species, including widespread extinctions. We've seen this really dramatic rise in extinction rate for species in general, especially for amphibians, but also for all other groups of vertebrates, largely because of increases in human population and habitat destruction. So if you look at what's the most common cause of species becoming endangered and eventually extinct, it's habitat destruction in almost every case. And almost all of that habitat destruction is clearing away these other types of land to make way for agricultural land. So we've had this big impact kind of modifying these lands in a fundamental way, which has led to this kind of catastrophic increase in extinctions around the world. So preserving these types of lands, you could call them natural, but it kind of just means any of the variety of land that's not just used for human functions, but is used for other species. There's a lot of benefits for this. Kind of selfishly, there's benefits for our own survival. Like these are just some of the plants pollinated by bees. Like most of the plants and vegetables, the fruits and vegetables that we eat are pollinated by insects, like bees, like butterflies. And if we do so much damage to those ecosystems that those pollinators die off, like bee populations have been crashing due to high uses of pesticides that kill them, monarch butterflies are now kind of in the realm of being classified as endangered because of high uses of pesticides. That will come back and bite us because we need those pollinators for our food. We need soil microorganisms for our food. We also need species like keystone species to support and stabilize communities. We need sea otters, and without sea otters, like we almost killed off all the sea otters off of our coast. And as a result of that, sea urchins have taken over and kind of decimated almost all of the kelp forests of California. So we've lost a lot of species that are beneficial to us, like fish, like abalone, because of our disruption of those ecosystems by killing most of the sea otters. So there are very selfish reasons for caring about preserving land, for keeping some land usable for other species, not just humans. There's also more subtle reasons to value natural places as well. There's a lot of evidence that going out into these natural settings, into environments where you're surrounded by many plants and animals, has huge impacts on human cognitive and psychological aspects, increasing cognitive abilities, lowering rates of depression and many mental disorders, increasing sociality. This was a study that looked at kind of like the stress and fear response of the amygdala in the brain after someone went on a walk. And if people went on a walk in a natural setting, they had a decreased fear stress response afterwards. But if they went on a walk in an urban setting, like in a city, it didn't change. If anything, it might have gone up a little bit. So there's special benefit to being surrounded by trees and plants and wildlife. This was a study with college students where they actually put students in virtual reality. And the virtual reality, they exposed them to nature. So it wasn't even really nature. It was like you're in a forest surrounded by trees. But it still, even though it was fake, it decreased their worries. It decreased panic. It decreased depression. It caused people to ruminate, to be more thoughtful after this virtual nature experience. Of course, it would be even higher if they were actually out in the wilderness, but this is showing you that just even kind of imagining and seeing natural settings has these psychological benefits. People who experience natural settings and benefit from these kinds of experiences, they will also value these types of habitats. They'll value preserving them, and they're more likely to engage in pro-environment actions like recycling or buying purportedly green products, which may or may not be actually any better than non-green products. But at least they're trying, at least they're motivated to do something. Such experiences in childhood also move people towards environmentalism in their political views as an adult. So if children grow up walking in the woods, going into wildlife, going camping, they are more likely to be supportive of environmentalist causes and protecting the environment as they get older. And there's been this huge political divide over time. Like back in the 80s, as you see, there wasn't a difference basically between political parties in how much they valued protecting the environment. Like after all, the EPA was passed by Richard Nixon, right? So basically everybody agreed that protecting the environment was important. But over time, some people have gotten more and more disconnected from natural lands, from natural settings, from other species, such that now there's very little support, like Republicans have gone down to 20% support protecting the environment, whereas for Democrats, it's fluctuated but stayed about the same, and even gone up a little bit recently. So the more that we can expose people to the environment and have them go out and experience wildlands and wildlife, the more likely they will be to make political decisions to protect those lands going forward, which is beneficial objectively to everybody, including other species. So I would say nature may not actually exist as a thing, but it's worth protecting nonetheless. Like it may be artificial to think of this thing as natural lands, but preserving land that's useful to other species and not just humans is, like I said, beneficial to everybody. Okay. Well, that's it. These are all my sources. I got a lot of sources. So I'll now take any questions. Me and Lena will take any questions that you have out there. If anyone's in the, I'll check out the Zoom as well.
The unnatural setting, Zoom.
Yeah.
I actually have a comment. I mean, Lena and I did a survey of students who did nature journaling.
Yes, that's
during
right.
the
Yeah.
pandemic when we had to do it online, but
Right.
we made the students go in their backyards and write
Right.
about nature, and we actually collected some data on it. I don't know if she remembers, but if she wants to comment on that, but it did show that students
I remember.
felt at ease and connected, and actually they said it was relaxing, even throughout there for what, 20 minutes a day.
That's right. Yeah. Right. Yeah, I remember that, and that has been substantiated by a whole bunch of studies that there is a therapeutic aspect to going out into, natural settings, if you want to call them natural settings. There's a lot of benefits to that. I mean, I noticed that too. It just kind of can calm you down a little bit.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Yeah.
Could I make a comment, Josh?
Yes.
Or just
Yeah.
or interject something more philosophical?
Okay.
This comes from Spinoza back in 1690 or something like that.
Okay. Okay.
And Spinoza says, and I'm quoting him, or I'm not quoting him, but it paraphrased, Jesus is not divine, that God is identical with nature, with that everything is necessitated by the laws of nature, and miracles are impossible.
Yeah.
So, I mean, he saw nature in everything, which is even beyond what the Greeks thought of. The Greeks had all of their myths, and they saw themselves, I think, although they were trying to look at an orderly world that they lived in, but they still saw themselves somehow aloof of it.
Yeah,
and,
I think I think that was a really good quote. I know back with like Plato and Aristotle, there was the common like dualistic view of humans, that there was like the kind of earthly aspect, and there was this sort of supernatural aspect as well. Like I think like I don't want to get into it too much, but like a lot of like Indian philosophy, like from India, is kind of interesting too, because they would commonly see people as spiritual beings, temporarily inhabiting a physical body, which is also a common theme for a lot of Christians. But what's kind of interesting about that is that they would also tend to think that about other species as well, because you can reincarnate into other species.
Yes.
So then you're basically believing that everything that's alive is like this spiritual, celestial component that's inhabiting a temporary physical existence. So it's kind of interesting. There's a lot of different ways of kind of dividing up reality.
Yes, and it's interesting for the sake of convenience and discussion, but if you really boil it all down over organic versus non-organic.
Yeah, right.
Come on, they're all organic.
What about CO2?
They're either inorganic or organic.
Right.
And explain it as it is.
Yeah.
I think that's such a confusing perspective,
Right.
really.
Yeah, I agree. I kind of think a lot about that with water, that, like living things on Earth are all, like anything is built on the presumption that we're mostly water. That's, for our cells to function, they need to have water. And yet we don't think of water as organic. And yet find anything living on Earth that doesn't have water, you won't be able to find it. Water is integrated into everything that's alive. So to me, it doesn't make any sense. Otherwise, you're just saying a big enough molecule that has carbon. Like that seems kind of dumb to classify, chemistry that way.
Absolutely.
But then there's a lot of stuff, like a lot of organic compounds are actually formed in space. You can find them on meteorites. So what do you do then? That wasn't, that wasn't made by organic processes.
There it is, the laws of nature, the laws of the universe.
Yeah. So I think that was a good point. Any other questions, comments? I could look. I see some names in the chat. Anyone else in the chat want to ask or say anything? No. Anybody else here? Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
So, what you're saying is that there hasn't been yet any demonstrated harm, but more study is needed.
Right. Yeah. So, right. So that big article, which I think is a good article to read, the one that says no scientific consensus on GMOs, that's a really good one to look at. And what they were kind of arguing is that, yes, they're like in the United States, there's a pretty good process for judging GMOs, especially ones for human consumption, although ones not for human consumption tend to be less studied. So there could be more harm inherent. Like if it's a GMO that's just specifically used to feed livestock, for example, that's not as studied or understood. So it needs more research. But there are examples of GMOs that were approved that probably are a little bit dangerous. It's just sometimes you need like longer term studies to demonstrate that. And the process of approval is too short. Like even with animal testing, it might be too short to demonstrate really long-term effects. But the main idea is just that, as a class, you can't say that GMOs are safe. Like there have been GMO projects that have been shut down in the process of making them because they realized this is dangerous. Like this is actually toxic, so they shut it down. But that only happens because you have a rigorous testing process. And if you lose that rigorous testing process, then who knows, what the effects of new GMOs would be. And it's kind of like, yeah, that there's not super solid evidence that there's anything particularly to be afraid of with GMOs that have been approved, but it does bug me a lot how much the GMO companies have pushed back and not wanted people to know what's GMOs. I feel like that kind of hurts their reputation a lot with a lot of people, that they should be transparent if it is in fact true that there's absolutely nothing wrong with GMOs, which is their claim. Does that help? Okay, right, sure.
It's also always going to be the case that, like, the longer you study something, the more information you're going to get.
Yeah.
So a lot of these things are new.
Right.
And so it's always a little bit of like, you kind of want it to be around a little bit longer.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, a lot of times, yeah, that's what I kind of thought about the sodium benzoate thing, because I think that was the first preservative that was approved for food. But it's like, now that it's been around so long, people are recognizing, oh, wait, it has these kind of subtle effects, like including on, human behavior and nervous development that we didn't know for a long time. Or like plastics. I kind of was thinking of doing a section on plastics. Like when plastics came out, people were like, this is like glass. It's like non-reactive. It won't do anything. But it's like now we know people are just, their bodies are polluted with microplastics that cause all kinds of damage, like not just to us, but to, other organisms. So I feel like we didn't know that until we started using plastics for decades, and our environment became polluted with microplastics. But I don't think it's safe. It would be good at all to say that plastics as a category are safe, even though that's what people would have said for a long time.
Mm-hmm.
They would have said it was as harmless as glass. Yeah.
It's interesting that in nature there's so much naked DNA that's out there, whether floating in seawater or laying on the ground. And I think the transformation of organisms by inadvertently becoming transformed, if you will, by viral insertions of DNA sequences.
That's true.
What, 7% of the human genome is of viral origin?
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, it's intriguing how this all comes together.
Yeah. And that's kind of what we use for the GMOs is we just co-opted a bacterium that does that.
Exactly.
For us. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That is really interesting. And then like maybe half or more than half of our DNA is just like little, transposons anyway. Like how much of it is actually like us? Like probably a very small amount.
Absolutely. It's intriguing. It's fascinating, really.
Yeah. Talking about the concentration.
I think it reflects it reflects how integrated all of life is on this planet.
Mm-hmm.
That's true. The bottom line.
Yeah.
It's all integrated.
It's something else that I was thinking of having a section on, but just how often in the past people thought that we kind of knew better than nature. Like we're thinking of having a section on baby formula, because when baby formula first got started, they kind of donated a lot to doctors, and there were doctors actually telling mothers, this is better than breast milk. And there were advertisements, especially in the past, that were like, my doctor advises me, this is the best milk for a baby, like kind of saying over and over again, this is better than breast milk. And it turns out it's not. But a lot of the functions, the subtle functions of breast milk, we didn't know back then. So it's like we always like, if you think you know everything, usually it's not, Like I like telling people, like, in the past, we thought we could manage fisheries. So we came up with this thing called maximum sustainable yield, which was like, how much fish can you take without causing the population to crash? But the problem is, if you don't know everything, you'll take too much and the population will crash. And that happened over and over and over again because we don't know everything. We don't understand the system. We don't understand all of the biology of the organisms. We don't know their lifespan. We don't, so we just mess it up over and over again when we think we know more than anything.
I hate to tell you, those maximum sustainable yields, some of those models came out of the University of Guelph.
Well, I think that might be why I actually think I had a professor who worked on those, but the reason I knew about it is because he told me how much they had messed up, because he knew how much, they made, because, you can trust scientists, but it's like, we don't know everything. So it's like, you ask the scientists, what's the absolute maximum amount of fish you can take without causing the population to crash? It's a stupid idea to even do that. But it's like, sometimes we trust ourselves as kind of masters of nature more than we should. Or we bring in a species to manage another species, but then that one takes over. And then, like we don't understand all of these links that are out there.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We blame it on the East Germans and the Russians out there overfishing.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah. I mean, we just had the salmon fishery in California failed, not because of overfishing, but because of over extraction of water, right?
Yeah.
So it's and then the crab fishing in Alaska failed, which was probably due to climate change, but the fishermen really wanted to say it wasn't overfishing, but it's like they always overfish. Like, you know, like the fishermen aren't going to say they overfished, but it's like that happens every time.
Well, Josh, thinking about that, when you realize when they're out there in the Northwest Atlantic fishing and they have quotes on certain species,
right,
and they get what's called bycatch.
Right.
Those that aren't the species they're supposed to be collecting.
Yeah, they just catch them fishing, accidentally in a net or something.
That's right. And then just kill them all. They kill them all in these great trawls.
Right,
I mean, it was infuriating to know how they did it.
Trolling nets should not be a thing.
Yeah. And then we all love scallops. Drag the bottom just after fish have spawned, for crying out loud.
I know.
Messing up this. So that's how we screwed it all up.
There's a lot of stuff too where they thought like, oh, if you throw back the little ones, that's the right thing. But for a lot of fish, if you have like a really big old fish, that's actually like really important in terms of the reproductive output of the population, because it's very rare to get to that age. So by taking the biggest fish and leaving the little ones, they're actually doing more damage than if they took the little ones, which is, you know, you're trying to compensate for the normal predation. Yeah, so it's like people always just, you know, they do the wrong thing. There was a question of in the chat of like, why does the FDA approve these things? And I think in most cases, the FDA is trying their best, but I think there are cases like when I was kind of reading about the, what is it called? The one preservative? Yeah, sodium benzoate. And like the article I read, it was kind of so crazy of just like how much of an influence this has, you know, affecting autism, affecting ADHD behavior, affecting like all of these like, you know, traits of our nervous system and neural development. And I think like, I don't think they knew that when they approved it. I think like, because you won't get that from like an animal study, like with rats or something. You won't appreciate the impact on, you know, even if it does affect behavior of rats, they're probably not looking for that. They're just looking for, are they dying or not? Is there noticeable changes to their organs or not?
Have to do something. Like if you want to have something that can sit on the shelf, and not cause death through like bacterial infection, you have to put something.
But I think I think now there's enough evidence that they should just get rid of sodium benzoate, and like the parabens seem so like utterly like they did studies where they injected parabens into like the flesh of animals, and it still didn't really do anything bad. Whereas sodium benzoate is basically like, you know, if you were taking some, you know, strong psychological drug and just like throwing it all over the place.
Well, scientific investigation is the best we have.
Right.
Like sometimes it's wrong, but that doesn't mean get rid of it.
But I think probably that's right. But I think the FDA probably doesn't give enough weight to long-term studies of these chemicals after they're already approved. I mean, they sometimes do, because like rotenone was approved, but then it was discontinued. But I feel like, you know, that because that's what the researchers were saying is like with most of these, you just need more research than exists. Yeah. Like there's just not enough evidence to conclude whether they're safer. Like maybe they're rushing the process a little bit too much, I think. Right. All right. Any questions? All right. Thank you very much for coming.
Thank you, you and Lena. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you. Great information you shared. I appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks, everybody.
I do think the kids need a little bit of like I said, it is good to know that there are people that.
Okay. You liked it? Okay. Yeah, I was even a little bit surprised, but I guess I was happy that in the end of the day, organic is better, even though like it's probably not in every case. Like we're getting less pesticides, so it's a better alternative. Yeah. Because I wasn't even sure of that, but the more I delved into it, I was like, oh yeah, there is a difference.
The only way we're ever going to get to that is through investment.
You can't avoid pesticides entirely. It's good for people to know though that organic stuff can have pesticides, so they should still wash it. Because I think not everybody knows that.
I like having
They're trying to get.
Okay, you too. Thanks for coming.
Hey, do you know, is it practical?
That's right.
Are we given this, is it the same protocol as last semester?
I think
Number 2?
so. Yeah, it's 2. I don't think it's been changed. I think it's the same one.
Because like those,
I think we. Oh, is it?
The EPA.
Okay. We might have had a new question. I'll ask Lena about it. She probably knows. Yeah. Any other questions in the chat? Thanks all for coming.
Well, she finished, she graduated already. But like you said, you introduce kids to stuff, recycle, reuse, and do like that. It makes a difference. So like she's big on, we can't
Thanks,
shop, we
everybody.
gotta go to the thrift store first, and then we can't find